Banishment in the biting winter snow was a death sentence. Standing before the sneering court, sightless and shivering, Genevieve heard her fated mate, the Alpha King, speak the words that shattered her world. "I reject you." But he had no idea what dormant power he had just ruthlessly awakened. To be human in the Ethelgard pack was to be invisible. To be human and blind was to be entirely worthless. Genevieve Croft had spent her 21 years mastering the geography of the Harrington stronghold through touch and sound, alone. She knew the exact number of uneven cobblestones between the servants' quarters and the grand kitchens. She knew the distinct, heavy footfalls of the lichen guards, the rustle of silk that announced the arrival of the noblewomen, and the sharp, coppery scent of the Alpha King's inner circle. She survived by remaining a ghost in a world of apex predators, scrubbing their stone floors and tending to their hearths. It was the night of the winter solstice, the most sacred evening in the werewolf calendar. The great hall was a cacophony of roaring fires, clashing goblets, and the booming laughter of visiting alphas. Genevieve had been assigned to serve wine, a cruel joke orchestrated by the head housekeeper. Navigating the crowded, chaotic room with a heavy silver tray was a perilous task. She kept her head down, her cloudy white eyes fixed on the floor she could not see. But as she neared the high table, the atmosphere shifted. The boisterous laughter died down. The air grew impossibly thick, crackling with an electric tension that made the hairs on Genevieve's arms stand on end. Then a scent hit her. It was overpowering, a mesmerizing blend of crushed cedar winter storms and wild musk. It bypassed her senses and slammed directly into her soul. Her tray rattled. A golden thread, invisible but intensely real, snapped into existence, tethering her heart to a terrifyingly powerful presence just a few feet away. "Mate." The word was a low, guttural growl that echoed through the sudden silence of the hall. Genevieve froze. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. She recognized that voice. It was Alistair Harrington, the Alpha King of Ethelgard, a man known for his tactical brilliance, his immense physical power, and his utter ruthlessness. "Alistair, what is it?" a smooth, honeyed voice asked. It belonged to Madeline Cromwell, the daughter of the king's beta, and the woman everyone assumed would be named Luna tonight. "Get away from me," Alistair snarled, though not at Madeline. Heavy, predatory footsteps approached Genevieve. She trembled instinctively, taking a step back, but her shoulders hit a stone pillar. A massive hand grabbed her chin, forcing her head up. The king's fingers were burning hot against her icy skin. "Look at me," Alistair commanded, his voice vibrating with a mixture of awe and absolute horror. I cannot, my king," Genevieve whispered, her voice shaking. "I am blind." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Whispers erupted like wildfire. A human, a blind servant. "The moon goddess has made a mistake. It is an insult to the royal bloodline." Alistair released her as if she had burned him. The mate bond was singing between them, a desperate, beautiful melody, demanding to be completed, but Genevieve could feel the violent rejection radiating from him. "This is a sick joke," Alistair said, his voice cold and loud enough for the entire court to hear. "I am the Alpha King. My pack requires strength. My borders require a warrior queen, a wolf who can bear powerful heirs and lead our armies. Not a defective, sightless human." Genevieve felt the tears prick her useless eyes. "My king, please," she murmured, clutching her rough woolen apron. She didn't want the crown. She only wanted the excruciating ache in her chest to subside. The bond demanded acceptance. To fight it was physical agony. Madeline stepped forward, the silk of her gown brushing against Genevieve's coarse skirts. "Alistair," she purred, placing a hand on his chest. "The pack is watching. You know what must be done. A king cannot be anchored to a stone." Alistair hesitated for only a fraction of a second. The pressure of his ancestors, the expectation of his people, and his own pride outweighed the divine magic of the moon goddess. He squared his shoulders, his voice projecting across the silent hall. "I, Alistair Harrington, Alpha King of Ethelgard, reject you, Genevieve Croft, as my mate and my Luna." The words were a physical blow. Genevieve screamed as the golden thread connecting them violently snapped. It felt as though a serrated blade had been dragged down her spine, cleaving her soul in two. She collapsed onto the cold stone floor, curling into a ball as she gasped for air. Above her, Alistair sounded breathless, suppressing a groan of pain, but his voice remained resolute. "And by the laws of my ancestors, no rejected mate may reside within the pack borders. The presence of a severed bond is a curse upon the land. Guards, take her to the edge of the Whispering Peaks. Cast her out." "No," Genevieve sobbed, coughing as her lungs seized. "Alistair, please, it's the dead of winter. I won't survive the night." "That," Madeline sneered from above, "is entirely the point." Rough hands hauled Genevieve to her feet. She was dragged through the jeering crowds, her pleas drowned out by the harsh laughter and the clinking of glasses as the court celebrated the king's brutal but necessary decision. She was stripped of her thick serving cloak and left in only a thin linen dress and worn leather boots. The heavy iron gates of Ethelgard shrieked open. The guards shoved her forward into the howling blizzard. "Don't come back, human," one of the guards spat. "Let the ice take you." The gates slammed shut, the heavy deadbolts sliding into place with a definitive final thud. Genevieve was alone. Around her, the wind howled like a pack of starving wolves. The temperature was plunging rapidly. She had no sight, no shelter, and a soul bleeding out from a severed mate bond. The snow was up to her knees. For hours, Genevieve dragged herself through the punishing drifts of the Whispering Peaks, her arms wrapped tightly around her shivering torso. Her bare fingers were already numb, and her toes felt like blocks of wood. Every step was an agony, not just of the flesh, but of the spirit. The broken mate bond throbbed in her chest like an infected wound. The rejection of an Alpha King was fatal to a werewolf. To a fragile human, it was supposed to be instantaneous death. Yet stubbornly, her heart continued to beat. Why won't it just stop, she thought, stumbling over a hidden tree root and crashing hard into the freezing snow. She lay there too exhausted to push herself back up. The ice stung her cheek. The howling wind began to sound like a lullaby. Hypothermia was setting in, wrapping her in a deceptive, sleepy warmth. She closed her cloudy white eyes, surrendering to the dark. But as her body began to shut down, something deep within her marrow ignited. It started as a tiny spark at the base of her spine, right where the severed mate bond had caused the most agony. The spark caught, fueled by the trauma of the rejection and the proximity of death. Suddenly, Genevieve's eyes snapped open. She gasped as a searing, terrifying heat flooded her veins. It wasn't the warmth of a fire. It was the heat of molten gold. Her blood boiled. She arched her back into the snow, a raw, inhuman scream tearing from her frozen lips. Her mother's dying words echoed in her mind. "Hide your eyes, my sweet Genevieve. The blindness is not a curse. It is a cage to keep you hidden from the wolves until you are strong enough to break it." The trauma of the king's rejection hadn't killed her. It had shattered the ancient seal her mother had placed upon her life force. The pain reached a blinding crescendo. Genevieve clawed at her own face as a brilliant, terrifying light erupted in her mind. For 21 years she had lived in absolute suffocating darkness. Now light came flooding in. But she did not see the world as humans did. She did not see the brown bark of the trees or the white of the snow. As she pushed herself up on trembling arms, she looked down at her hands. They were glowing. She looked around the forest. The darkness of the night was gone, replaced by a breathtaking, terrifying tapestry of energy. She saw the bright, pulsing green life force of the ancient pines. She saw the sluggish, icy blue currents of the freezing river nearby. And beneath the snow, she saw the glowing red footprints of predators. She wasn't just human. She was a descendant of the Valerius I mothers, the ancient mythical priestesses whose magic had originally bound the wolves to the moon. The Alpha Kings had hunted them to extinction centuries ago, fearing their ability to control, strip, and command the pack bonds. Genevieve's ancestors had gone into hiding, sealing their own power, living as blind, powerless humans to survive. "Well, I'll be damned," a gruff voice echoed through the trees. Genevieve flinched, snapping her head toward the sound. She didn't see a man. She saw a blazing aura of bruised purple and fierce crimson, a werewolf, but one carrying a heavy aura of sorrow and exile. A figure stepped out from behind a massive oak. It was an older man, heavily scarred, wrapped in thick furs. He carried a massive iron-tipped spear. He stared at Genevieve, his amber wolf eyes wide with shock as he looked at her face. Genevieve reached up to touch her eyes. They were no longer cloudy. She didn't need a mirror to know they were glowing with a radiant, ethereal silver light. "A Valerius," the man whispered, dropping to one knee in the snow. "The legends, they said the line was dead." "Who are you?" Genevieve asked, her voice no longer shaking. It sounded different, deeper resonant, with an ancient power she was only just beginning to understand. "My name is Gareth Holt," the man said, bowing his head. "Former vanguard of Ethelgard, exiled by the king's father." He looked up, a fierce, predatory grin spreading across his scarred face. "You carry the scent of the Alpha King. He rejected you." "He threw me out to die," Genevieve corrected coldly. The agonizing pain of the severed bond was gone, replaced by a vast, buzzing hum of power. "He is a fool," Gareth rumbled, rising to his feet and offering her a thick fur cloak. "By rejecting a first mother, he hasn't just broken a mate bond. He has broken his own crown. Come with me, child. You have much to learn, and the king has a war coming that he cannot possibly win." Miles away in the grand fortress of Ethelgard, the celebration had come to a grinding, horrifying halt. Alistair Harrington stood at the head of the great hall, a crystal goblet shattered in his bleeding hand. Madeline was speaking to him, but her voice sounded distorted miles away. A sudden agonizing cramp seized Alistair's chest. He dropped to his knees, clutching his heart. His wolf, usually a source of immense strength and pride, was howling in absolute terror inside his mind. "Alistair!" Richard Cromwell, the beta, rushed forward. "Alpha, what is wrong?" Alistair couldn't speak. He looked down at his hands. The veins in his arms were turning a sickening necrotic black. The air in the fortress suddenly grew freezing cold, extinguishing the roaring fires in the hearths. A collective cry of panic rose from the nobility as frost began to aggressively spread across the stone floors. The Alpha's power was the anchor of the pack. When the Alpha thrived, the land thrived. But Alistair hadn't just rejected a human servant. He had rejected the very source of their magic. As he gasped for breath on the freezing floor, his wolf whimpered a single terrifying truth in his mind. "We cast out the light. Now we rot in the dark." 3 months passed. In the hidden valleys beyond the whispering peaks, spring began to bloom with an unnatural, vibrant ferocity. But within the stone walls of Ethelgard, the brutal winter refused to break. The curse of the severed bond had manifested as a physical rot. The once impenetrable Harrington stronghold was crumbling. Frost clung to the tapestries, and the mighty pines surrounding the territory had withered into brittle black skeletons. Worse than the environmental decay was the devastation afflicting the wolves. Without the stabilizing magic of a true Luna, and specifically the Valerius magic, Alistair had so violently cast out, the pack bonds were disintegrating. Warriors woke up to find they could no longer shift. Others went entirely feral, their human consciousness snapping under the agonizing strain of their dying wolves, forcing the King's Guard to execute their own brethren. Alistair Harrington was a ghost of the Alpha King he had once been. He sat upon his iron throne, wrapped in heavy furs, shivering uncontrollably. The necrotic black veins that had started in his hands now crawled up his neck, poisoning his blood. His wolf was completely silent, buried in a comatose state of grief and starvation. Alpha. Richard Cromwell the Beta stepped into the throne room. He did not bow. The respect in Ethelgard had died weeks ago. We have lost the southern border. The patrols did not return, and the Vane Pack is mobilizing. Alpha Cedric knows we are vulnerable. He marches on Ethelgard at dawn. Alistair squeezed his eyes shut, a hollow cough racking his chest. Let them come. We fight to the last man. Fight with what? Madeline shrieked, stepping out from the shadows. Her once radiant golden hair was dull and falling out in clumps. The stress of the pack's decay had accelerated her aging, leaving sharp, bitter lines etched around her mouth. Half our men are stuck in their human forms. The other half are too sick to lift a broadsword. This is your fault, Alistair. You were supposed to be strong. Alistair's eyes snapped open, blazing with a feverish, dying light. I did this for you, Madeline. You whispered in my ear. You told me the human was a parasite. She was a parasite, Madeline yelled back, her voice echoing off the frozen walls. But she took the pack's luck with her. When she died in that blizzard, they were interrupted by a terrified scholar, a frail human named Arthur, who stumbled into the throne room, clutching a crumbling leather-bound tome. My king, I have found it in the ancient archives. Arthur dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he opened the book. The glowing eyes, the blindness. It wasn't a defect, sire. Genevieve Croft was not a mere human. She was a Valerius, a first mother. Dead silence fell over the hall. Alistair's breath hitched. Every werewolf cub was raised on the terrifying fables of the Valerius, the original priestesses who possessed the power to weave or unravel the very souls of lycanthropes. The book states, Arthur whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks, that an alpha who rejects a Valerius severs his own connection to the moon goddess. You didn't just reject your mate, sire. You amputated the pack's soul. She was our anchor. Alistair slumped back against the throne, the sheer magnitude of his catastrophic mistake crushing the last remaining air from his lungs. Genevieve hadn't been a weak link. She had been the most powerful being to step foot in Ethelgard in 1,000 years, and he had thrown her to the ice. Far from the dying stronghold in the vibrant heart of a hidden sanctuary called Silverhold, Genevieve Croft didn't look like the terrified blind servant who had been dragged through the snow. She stood at the edge of a crystal-clear lake, dressed in supple leather armor and a cloak of midnight blue. Her cloudy eyes were gone, replaced by mesmerizing pools of liquid silver that saw far more than the physical realm. She saw the glittering, colorful threads of life force connecting every living creature around her. Under the tutelage of Gareth Holt, she had mastered her inheritance. The sanctuary was teeming with life. Hundreds of rogue wolves, outcasts, and oppressed humans had flocked to Silverhold, drawn by the undeniable beacon of her awakening magic. With a mere touch, Genevieve could soothe a feral wolf's fractured mind. With a whispered command, she could weave broken bonds back together, creating a new, wildly loyal pack that bowed not to an alpha, but to a sovereign priestess. "They are ready, my lady," Gareth said, stepping up beside her. He looked years younger, his brutal scars faded by her healing magic, his wolf aura blazing with renewed, majestic purple light. Genevieve turned her silver gaze toward the horizon, in the direction of Ethelgard. She could see the dark, festering void where Alistair's territory lay. She could feel the agonizing cries of the innocent wolves trapped under his doomed reign, their golden threads fraying and snapping, and she could see the encroaching, aggressive crimson aura of the Vane Pack marching toward them. Alistair Harrington made his choice. Genevieve said, her voice echoing with a profound, resonant power that sent shivers of awe down Gareth's spine. But the innocents of Ethelgard do not deserve to be slaughtered for their king's arrogance. We ride tonight, Gareth, not to save the king, but to claim what is mine. Dawn broke over Ethelgard, but there was no sunlight. The sky was a bruised, heavy purple matching the despair of the defenders. The heavy iron gates, which had stood for centuries, buckled and groaned under the relentless assault of the Vane Pack's battering rams. Alpha Cedric Vane, a massive brute of a man with a sadistic smile, stood at the vanguard, his warriors howling for blood. With a final ear-splitting crack, the gates shattered inward. Alistair stood in the courtyard, gripping his broadsword with trembling hands. His royal guard, diminished and exhausted, formed a fragile defensive ring around him and the surviving nobility. Madeline cowered behind a stone pillar, weeping hysterically. "Look at the mighty Alpha King of Ethelgard," Cedric roared, stepping over the splintered wood. He didn't even bother shifting into his wolf form. Alistair wasn't worth the energy. "Pathetic. Dying from a broken heart, are we? Surrender the stronghold, Alistair, and I promise your execution will be swift." Ethelgard bows to no one. Alistair spat, though the words lacked their former thunder. He raised his sword, preparing for the final, fatal clash. But before Cedric could step forward, the ground began to tremble. It wasn't the heavy, chaotic thud of an attacking army. It was a rhythmic, pulsing vibration that resonated deep within the chest of every wolf in the courtyard. The violent blizzard that had raged for months suddenly stopped. The heavy clouds above Ethelgard tore open, and a blinding shaft of pure silver moonlight pierced the gloom, illuminating the shattered gateway. Out of the light stepped a woman. The Vane warriors faltered their wolves, whining in sudden instinctual submission. Even Cedric took a step back, his eyes widening. Genevieve Croft walked into the courtyard of the very stronghold that had cast her out. She did not walk like a servant. She moved with the lethal, terrifying grace of a god. Her silver eyes glowed with blinding intensity, and her dark hair whipped around her face. Behind her stood Gareth Holt and an army of 300 magnificent, healthy wolves, their eyes glowing with the reflected magic of their priestess. Alistair dropped his sword. The metal clanged loudly against the frozen stone. He fell to his knees, his breath catching in his throat. Even through the necrotic decay of his veins, his dormant wolf slammed into his consciousness, howling a desperate, shattered plea. "Mate! Mate! Mate! Who dares interfere?" Cedric snarled, shaking off his initial shock. He lunged toward Genevieve, his claws extending, his eyes flashing yellow. "I am the Alpha of the Vane, and this territory is mine." Genevieve didn't even draw a weapon. She simply raised her glowing hand and stared into Cedric's eyes. "You are nothing but a trespasser in my domain," she said, her voice layered with 1,000-strong chorus of the ancient Valerius ancestors. She flicked her wrist. Cedric screamed. It was a sound of absolute soul-tearing agony. Genevieve hadn't touched his body. She had reached into the ethereal plane and seized the thick crimson thread connecting Cedric to his pack. With a sharp tug, she stripped him of his alpha command. The golden chains of loyalty that bound his warriors to him evaporated into mist. Instantly, Cedric collapsed, reduced to a weeping, powerless human. His warriors, feeling the sudden, complete absence of their alpha's domination, dropped to their bellies, exposing their throats to Genevieve in absolute terror and reverence. The battle was over before it had even begun. Genevieve walked slowly past the groveling, vain warriors, her silver eyes fixed on the man kneeling in the center of the courtyard. Alistair looked up at her tears cutting tracks through the grime and black veins on his face. He saw the magnificent, ethereal beauty he had been too blind to recognize. He felt the terrifying, intoxicating aura of the power he had thrown away. "Genevieve," he choked out, crawling toward her on his hands and knees. "You're alive. The moon goddess be praised you're alive. Please, please, my queen. Forgive me. I was a fool. Reclaim the bond. Save me. Save our pack." He reached out a trembling hand to touch the hem of her cloak. "Do not touch her!" Gareth roared, stepping forward with his spear raised, but Genevieve held up a hand, stopping him. She looked down at Alistair. There was no hatred in her silver eyes, only a cold, unfathomable pity. "You speak of bonds, Alistair," Genevieve said softly, though her voice carried across the silent, breathless courtyard. "You threw me to the ice because I lacked sight. Because I did not fit your narrow, fragile definition of strength. You rejected the very soul of your kingdom for the sake of your own vanity." "I was wrong," Alistair sobbed, coughing up dark blood onto the snow. "I accept you. I, Alistair Harrington, accept you as my mate and my Luna." He waited for the golden thread to snap back into place, for the healing warmth of the mate bond to flood his dying veins. Nothing happened. Genevieve tilted her head. "A mate bond requires two souls, Alistair, and you severed ours the night of the solstice. I did not come back to be your Luna." Madeline, seeing her former lover groveling, finally snapped. Drawing a hidden dagger, she lunged out from behind the pillar, aiming straight for Genevieve's back. "You witch! You ruined everything." Genevieve didn't even turn around. She merely thought the command. The magic lashed out like a whip. Madeline froze mid-stride, her eyes widening in horror as her wolf was entirely stripped from her spirit, leaving her a hollow, empty shell. She collapsed into the snow, screaming in grief for the beast she had just lost forever. Genevieve returned her gaze to the broken king. "I, Genevieve Croft, first mother of the Valerius line, sovereign of Silverhold, reject you, Alistair Harrington." She declared her words, vibrating with finality. "I do not kill you, for death is a mercy you haven't earned. You will live the rest of your days as the powerless human you so deeply despised. You will watch as I rebuild Ethelgard from the ashes of your arrogance." Alistair screamed as the last remaining spark of his alpha magic was extinguished, leaving him completely, permanently mortal. He curled into a ball on the frozen stones, weeping for the crown, the power and the mate he had foolishly thrown away. Genevieve stepped past him, walking up the grand stone steps toward the heavy iron throne. The surviving Ethelgard wolves, feeling the warm, majestic light of the Valerius wash over them, dropped to their knees. The frost began to melt from the walls. The necrotic rot receded. She turned and faced the massive courtyard of kneeling wolves, humans and rogues. She was no longer the blind servant in the shadows. She was the light that had returned to banish the dark. And she would never be cast out again. Did Genevieve's epic revenge give you chills? If you loved this tale of a rejected human rising to become a supernatural queen, don't forget to hit that like button and share this story with your fellow fantasy lovers. Do you think Alistair deserved his brutal punishment, or was Genevieve too harsh? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another thrilling werewolf drama.